Is philosophy perhaps dead? I am Romano Antonio Anna Paolo Torquato Amadeo, an epistemologist who, for over 30 years, has found what philosophy has always been looking for, but has never found. All philosophers have searched in vain for a reason for existence, in all ways, but always and only by giving for certain that time really advances, as we see it from our birth until our death. In this direction of existence man seems to be born condemned to die, and it seems that chance and nature are the masters, with their laws, and the living in vain looking for a satisfactory destiny, that satisfies everyone and gets rid of any difference between rich and poor, enlightened and idiots, all victims of their own origin and nature. In the advancing direction of time, in which everyone goes to die, there is no time to implement a perfection of existence, and all philosophical models have not led to final and satisfactory solutions for all. For we see men condemned to the injustice of their personal kind of living. Now, since 1998, I have posted on the web the ideas of the new Italian school of philosophy, and they find a definitive solution to all this. In fact, if a solution does not exist in the verse of becoming and doing things, since in this verse we see there is everything, both good and bad, the matter changes decisively if we come to believe that everything that actually appears to be done, by nature, and by living beings, in a way without any possibility of a satisfaction for all, is so only by virtue of a pure, apparent effect, which exists on the basis of the verse in act, and which is really opposed to it. If in fact we see eliminated all this injustice, and this impossible solution, then it is in act true the absolute perfection of existence, which brings back to the initial state every possible action. Then the punctual elimination of all real and possible imperfections becomes the real way used by the absolute perfection to be totally realized. Therefore, in order to solve an impossible solution sought in the advancing verse in time, it is necessary to believe that the verse really in action is the personal descent from time, and that on the basis of its actual vision by reaction, and therefore equal and opposite action, we see advancing what is actually going backwards. Well, this philosophical vision is based on the fundamental principles of physics, action and reaction, and general relativity, for which every apparent effect is perceived only according to the truth of the opposite action. Therefore it is not a thesis made in air. But it affirms a truth that no philosopher before Romano Amadeo had ever considered true, that we see the actual advancement of time only starting from its equal and opposite truth, according to which time really goes backwards. For 30 years Romano Amadeo has been fighting against actual appearances. In vain he tries to make us understand that in our cycles in time we see in the same way we see the cycle of the earth around the sun, seeing something absolutely false, that it is the sun to rotate around the earth. Even though we see all cycles in the opposite way of the true dynamics, man does not come to believe that even in the cycle of existence we see the same thing, that we see the end of life coming since we are going towards its dawn. Now that common men have difficulty to notice the novelties, it is clear, but the fact that philosophy has not detected in 30 years the absolute truth of this thought leaves serious doubts about the ability of philosophers to realize a truly new truth, and totally satisfactory. To all those who are still open-minded and can understand this, if general relativity exists, and everything appears through the equal and opposite that is in place, does it not appear, really, the advancement in time, through the equal and opposite being in place, of the retreat in time? And if it is true that there is a backward movement in time, and we see the future, are we not seeing the false in reality? Like the sun revolving around us, while it is only us doing it. Aren't we going to see how we rose again by going, in retrospect, into our past? And if philosophy leads to the aphorism 125 of Nietzsche, on the death of God dictated by a madman, is he not really a madman? Like all men who judge as true the real appearance of reality, equal and contrary to what is really in place. Is it perhaps by chance that in Bible 1.25 there is just the birth of the name Jesus, from the first G of Jacob, and from Esau, without the second vowel A? I wonder if it is not rather dead the philosophical ability to perceive what is really new. I have been arguing for 30 years that everything that to us seems to be really placed in act. It is, but only an equal and opposite act. This ascertains that there is total perfection, which in truth annihilates every real imperfection. But no one grasps the importance of this judgment. I affirm it based on the third principle of dynamics, of action plus one and reaction minus one that are simultaneous, and are composed in plus one times minus one is equal to minus one, as also doing the undoing, and undoing the doing. We see only what is equal and contrary to the divine perfection, which is being realized. Man is created from the dust of the tomb or cremation. Every deceased person is brought back to life. He receives the gift of a finite existence defined in all things by the infinite power of the Almighty Absolute. It divides itself into the unity of infinite infinitesimals, and to each it gives a character, through which each defeats its relative, in a relative way. It is the indispensable and necessary replay in place as a temporary loan of a life to be returned, which instead is not a loan, but the gift of an existence, now finished, and which is truly returned to the God of Elia and of the biblical I am who I am. The philosophical ability general relativity always implements the way backwards in time, and on its base then it observes the way up in time. If horizontally there is space and time and vertically there is only time, we have an inclined line in space-time. And the two directions, uphill and downhill, that are composed together always result in the downhill path, according to which then we see as a relative effect the real ascent in time. Minus 1 multiplied by plus 1 always makes up minus 1 as well as plus 1 multiplied by minus 1. This is a truth that can escape to those who blindly believe in the truth of things they see so real. It should not escape the philosophers of science. But today philosophy has lost the ability to control the truths of science. In a world where everything is repetitive, and appears to advance by opposing cycles, as in any wave, the lesson of Galileo has not served scientists. They define themselves post-Galilean only for having research with microscopes and telescopes. But that normally, in the real cycle of the Earth, we see the sun rotating around the Earth, therefore the opposite of the true. This does not even raise the doubt that in the whole cycle of reality, it always appears so, that every apparent dynamic is always equal and contrary to the truth. So much so that if in truth everything is totally undone, only then can it appear entirely made. And philosophers are so devitalized, in their ability to realize, that they appear to have become stupid. Reflect. Philosophy has always tried to discover a definitive truth that would explain the ultimate reason for all things. If what appears to be done, is in truth done, but it only appears fact in a way relative to a real semblance, but equal and contrary to the true, you cannot deny that this solves all the mystery in being. You can deny that this explains all this imperfect world, and in perennial search for its perfection? And so I ask you, how come I've been shouting it out in circles now for over 30 years, and no one has noticed? No philosopher, school, or journal of philosophy, to which I have said it, has at least bothered to point out to human intelligence the existence of this new Italian school of epistemology, which has found the solution in vain by all sought. Either everyone is asleep, or the human thought has been so imprisoned by real appearances, that it has lost all critical capacity on everything that goes beyond sensible reality. If everything appears to be advancing in time, how can one believe that in truth everything is moving backwards? And yet not everything advances. Antimatter and magnetism go backwards. It is only for effect equal and contrary to that matter and light appear to advance. It no longer knows, however, human intelligence go beyond the field of real appearances to discern the true. The cause of the electric flux is the magnetic one. Do not think about how the electric flux is generated, in the clockwise direction, putting in anti-clockwise rotation a magnetic field. Sure, the opposite happens in electric motors too, but the electric flux itself is secondary. It is generated by the magnets that are in place in nature. Magnetism attracts everything to the center, through universal gravitation, and electricity and matter, which appear to move in the equal and opposite direction, are only their real apparent reaction. In a world where everything is relative, everything exists in that equal and opposite way, given by the two opposites, of a centripetal centering and a centrifugal expansion. But who comes first between the two is the gathering. Just as you can only manage capital from scratch only if you have first had a loan. Even a state that mints money can do it only by guaranteeing it, with gold resources guaranteeing it, with gold or other resources which have been pledged. The negative is the result of the simultaneous existence between credits and debits, having and owing, the plus and the dash. To the present intelligence of philosophy, however, all this does not arouse even a doubt, and one believes in that which in fact one has more in what one really must. Einstein, professing his general relativity in our, and only advancing time, supposes it to be true. In this the limit of his relativity, in fact of generality, because if it advances in effect, it does it because really they are effects caused by magnetism and antimatter that retrograde at the same time. Philosophers, you understand that if every real thing that we see, and that is bounded, which appears to us to be made by the universe and the living, is instead brought back to its beginning, there is a force superior to that of the universe so powerful that it annihilates everything? Do you understand that to be able to get rid of every reality indicates a force superior to it, that can annihilate everything? Indicates a force superior to it, which one by one eliminates every determination in place, and it is the true and absolute dominion of what everyone has always called God. This is the real proof that God exists, and has the omnipotence to realize everything from nothing. This is the proof that the man Nietzsche finally sent to the churches to boast that God was dead was truly insane. That God was dead, not finding him in all that reality which had, with the foundation of being, assumed the supreme dead of its relative existence. Does it appear that we are moving towards the dead end of life? Well, this apparent dynamic is true only in the departure of our train of life, and precisely from that point where it seems to us it will end. It is already taking out of the way from the very beginning everything really possible, saving us totally from the apparent damage given to us by nature and living beings. They appear so real and powerful, only because we see the opposite of what is really going on. Salvation by a God who seems to be dead only because he has never ceased to be so alive and powerful, as to give us only the semblance of our power, to go and build freely, in appearance, but only the most extreme presuppositions of our salvation that will come in the last moment. Life has therefore been given to us in the moment of death, already all done, and we are only going to see how God has given it to us, while it will seem to all that he has taken it away from us, making it seem to be made only by us, who are his infinite souls. It totally resolves the intricate question, and with all the guarantees given by scientific truths. And yet, in 30 years, philosophy has not even taken note of it. Perhaps it is the philosophy to be dead, instead of that God of which wrote the philosopher Nietzsche in his famous aphorism of God is dead, which I report below. Nietzsche, Aphorism 125. The Madman. You have heard of the madman who lit a lantern in the clear morning light, ran to the marketplace, and shouted incessantly, "I seek God. I seek God." And since right there were gathered many of those who did not believe in God, he aroused great laughter. "Is he perhaps lost?" said one. "Is he as lost as a child?" asked another. "Or is he well hidden? Is he afraid of us? Has he embarked? Has he emigrated?" They shouted and laughed in great confusion. The madman leaped into their midst and pierced them with his glances. "Where has God gone?" He shouted, "I want to tell you. We are the ones who killed him, you and me. We are all his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we empty the sea by drinking it down to the last drop? Who gave us the sponge to wipe out the whole horizon? What did we ever do to loosen this earth from the chain of its sun? Where does it move now? Where do we move? Away from all suns. Is not ours an eternal plummet? And backward, sideways, forward, on all sides? Is there still a high and a low? Are we not wandering as through an infinite nothingness? Doesn't empty space glow over us? Hasn't it grown colder? Doesn't night keep coming, more and more night? Must we not light lanterns in the morning? Do we not hear the noise of the gravediggers as they bury God? Do we not still smell the stench of divine putrefaction? Even the gods are decomposing. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we, the murderers of all murderers, console ourselves? That which is most sacred and most powerful the world has possessed until now, has bled out under our knives. Who will cleanse this blood from us? With what water shall we wash? What atoning rites, what sacred games shall we invent? Is not the magnitude of this action too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods, to appear at least worthy of it? There was never a greater action. All those who will come after us will belong, by virtue of this action, to a higher history than all histories have ever been until now. At this point the insane man fell silent, and turned his gaze again upon his listeners. They too fell silent, and looked at him in amazement. At last he threw down his lantern, which shattered and went out. I come too soon, he continued. It is not yet my time. This enormous event is still on its way. It has not yet reached the ears of men. The lightning and the thunder want time, the light of the constellations want time, the actions want time, even after they have been carried out, so that they may be seen and heard. This action is still farther away from them than the farthest constellations, yet it is they who have done it. It is also said that on the same day the madman broke into several churches, and sang his Requiem Aeternam Deo. Hunted down outside and questioned, it is said that he invariably replied, "What else are these churches, if not the pits and tombs of God?"